Hey everybody, this is Dr. Russ Jones.
And Brad Kennan.
We are wide open. How are you, my friend?
Good, how are you doing?
Good to see you. I just want to say in advance, I'm not trying to blow you kisses, but when we were coming on, I could see this little gnat flying in front of my face, so I was blowing at it, trying to like get it out of my way here.
All right.
So I'm doing good, feeling good today.
Right. Well, that's good.
It's great weather here in the Mountain State. I was out in the woods today. It's in the around, I got up to 50 today. We had about 5 inches of snow on the mountaintops. So I drove to a remote place, hiked up a mountain, went back in a couple miles trying to see if I could get lucky and find a track of which I have never found a snow track.
All right.
You ever seen a snow track in person?
I mean, of a Bigfoot, no, but of a dog, yes. And a horse, yes. And a rabbit, yes. And a cat, yes.
Yeah.
But not of a Bigfoot.
Yeah. I was going to ask you that question. I don't know if you're ready for my question. Did you have anything going on exciting that you wanted to tell me about before I ask you my question?
No, besides I finally got my power back about 30 minutes before our show came on. So that was good. I don't have to do this from the cab of my truck or something like that, driving around trying to find Wi-Fi somewhere. So
that's good.
We're good.
Good.
Yeah.
All right. So here's my question.
Go ahead.
So, of course, you and I are on the internet a lot. We're monitoring these things. And I would say in a normal year, there's probably in a winter, 3 to 4 legitimate Bigfoot track finds in the winter. There's probably 100 tracks that people think they're a Bigfoot, but it's really some type of galloping dog or, a coyote or whatever it happens to be.
Snow melt, something that's
snow melt. That's right.
It's got a little bigger than it should have been.
Why do you think we're not finding more Bigfoot tracks in the winter?
Because people aren't looking for them. People aren't going 5 miles into the woods during the winter time where there's snow on the ground. Unless a Bigfoot lily walks up to their house, walks around it, and walks back out into the woods, and they've had maybe some things happen. I just don't think people are looking, or people don't know to look, or they're out on their side by sides and things like that, so they're not going slow enough to find them. B, maybe they probably just aren't looking for them, or C, they just not really paying attention, and they see something going across the field and they just think, oh well, there went a galloping rabbit or a dog or whatever that is, or a deer track, and we're just going to go right on by it.
It's always surprising how many people just want to, if it's in a straight line and it's 14 to 20 inches long in terms of the opening in the snow, and 4, 5, 6 feet, then they want to call it a Bigfoot track.
Right.
And I see a lot of them. A lot of them get sent to me, and of course, it's really hard to tell the great majority of the time, whether it's a Bigfoot track or not. When I was out today, I was thinking about this exact thing. And I think the primary thing, if I had to guess, was just the rarity of the animal, that there's just not that many of them around. But I just have a suspicion that the area that they are in, that they go to the most remote, inaccessible section of that during snowfalls, and maybe they're not that active. But some of them are large animals. They have to eat. So, where was it? We took a report where the guy had found like 3 rabbits that were stuck in the snow with the head off or something. Somebody you and I were talking to.
Was that just on our podcast or something?
Maybe it's something like that, that they have something set up where they can
buy
eat.
A cave or something, and they thought they were that was the gentleman I think that we just had on I think his show drops this week. Wayne from the Bigfoot Odyssey. I think maybe he was talking about it.
I can't remember. We've done so many,
Odyssey or that Bigfoot podcast or something. Yeah, I think that's what it was.
I just don't think that they're way back in farther than I went today, and I'm sure I was much farther than. There was no tracks anywhere when I was at. As soon as I got to this remote location, I'd forgotten how hard it is to walk through the snow when it gets like 5 inches deep when you're going up a mountain. And then as I age a little bit today, I was like, gosh, maybe it's a little sketchy because you just can't see, you're on a trail. You're just out there hiking up some mountain. And there's a root and a stick, and you slip and fall on ice, and it's something to consider.
Like, so you're doing your podcast with a torn meniscus and on a bed somewhere. I didn't want to say ACL, so I don't want to jinx you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. You do the SOS call from your iPhone for somebody to come and get you, because you're hugging your lab to try to stay warm after the sun sets.
Right. When you get you one of those Garmin watches or one of those $25,000 Breitlings, and you just pull the ripcord, an antenna pops out and it calls.
Well, if you ever got your drone or a large drone, I could send you a message. You could fly over, hover, pick me up, and take me out of the woods.
Right. We've been talking to our buddy Jeff.
Mm-hmm.
He's a drone guy. He's a BFRO guy. We'll get him on at some point. But, I sent you that drone they were looking at, and that drone was $600,000. It's got a jet turbine engine on it, and it will fly for 3 hours and 40 miles. So it's basically like having, a Reaper drone that, they're flying in Iraq, except it's a rotor unit. Because you're flying off cameras and sensors. You don't have to look at it. You don't have to be near it. You can take it out to a truck somewhere and take off, and this thing, you can fly it from 40 miles away.
Didn't you tell me it has sensors so that you could actually set it so that if you were looking for an upright animal or human, so to speak, that it could zone in on that?
I do believe so. I think that we could ask Jeff that in a little more detail.
Yeah.
But he says basically you can put any sensors on these things you want, and it's amazing. So it's a Swiss-made drone, but that's our next purchase. So as soon as I'll get the GoFundMe up for $600,000, and I'm sure we'll have it next week.
Okay.
So anyway,
let's go for it.
So tonight we do have a guest. It's not just you and I talking. It's a buddy of yours.
Yep.
You've been on several of his, or you've been on at least one of his programs, maybe more.
More coming.
More coming.
More coming. I've done a couple of them,
because I saw an Instagram post, and I looked on the Instagram post. I'm like, man, it's like Russ Jones right there. And next thing I know, it's got Seth's name on it, and it says an upcoming documentary with Dr. Russ Jones and Seth Breedlove. Welcome to the show. How are you doing this evening?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. That snow thing made me think of when I was first getting into all of this back in it would have been like 2014. I was hiking near River Styx out near Wadsworth, which is today it's like an overly developed little suburb outside of Medina, somewhere between Medina, Ohio, and Cleveland. And River Styx had their own monster during the 70s into the 90s. The last known sighting that I'm aware of was like very early 2000s, before all the heavy development started. But I was out there at a metro park hiking in the snow and found, I was so psyched when I found this, because it looked like a trackway through the snow, way off trail. I was off trail. And I found this trackway running through the woods, and I took a picture and I sent it to Mark DeWorth. And that was the first time that Mark, that I had my hopes as a Bigfooter crushed by someone. Because Mark was like, that's those shoes with the toes.
Oh,
yeah.
Didn't Fila make those or something like that?
Something like that.
They used to be popular for a little while.
Yeah, especially for like running, I guess, was like a big thing. So
the barefoot stuff.
Yeah, that there was another time I found tracks, and Mark told me it was a rabbit, which was also the first time, I was really aware of how much a rabbit, jumping through the snow can look like footprints in the snow. So
had you ever
jump
found
through the
tracks?
snow and then it gets smelt, and they make bear and it looks like a footprint.
Have I found tracks?
Yeah. Have you ever found tracks?
I found a track out at the cabin where I had my sighting. And I casted it. I'd never casted anything before. Mark Matsky and I did it. And then Cliff came out and looked at it. I took the cast to Kentucky so Cliff could look at it, because we were doing an event together, and he crushed my my hopes at that point and said he said it could be a track, but he was like, there's not enough distinguishable from the cast itself for him to say one way or the other. I'm convinced that was an actual track because of the fact that the night before, it was a single track, but it was standing on a kind of a muddy slope, and it looked like it had just turned to walk up the hill. It actually slid a little as it was going up the hill. But the night before, right where this thing was, we had heard this really weird kind of murmuring or mumbling that went on for maybe 45 minutes. So I'm convinced that was a cast or a track, because we had just a ton of activity out at that property over the course of like 2 months. And there was something that had been over there the night before that I believe was one of these things.
Was it like the samurai chatter?
No,
it wasn't like
I don't even know what to compare it to. And I actually think it's been a while since I went back and watched the Bigfoot Project, because that's where we documented all that stuff. It might be on audio. It's just a very no, I wouldn't say chatter. I've heard that. I've heard the whoop. I've heard a lot of stuff. I've never heard anything like this. It was a very deep, guttural kind of murmuring is about as good as I can get, because there was no language. There was nothing going on. It was just like that. It was almost like it was singing. As creepy as that might sound. And this went on for, a while. I said 45 minutes. That's probably an exaggeration, but it's been a while since all that took place. It was I think it was the late summer and very early fall of 2021 when all this happened. And that was also when I saw one of them out at Heather's. It was actually Heather's property out near Minerva.
What do you call us? Heather, your producer, or
Heather's our researcher, but she is in a producer role now. She just came on full time back at the tail end of December. So Heather's a researcher producer.
Okay.
So when you say Minerva, are you in Ohio?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're up north, that area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I grew up in Bolivar, which is no one knows where that's It's a tiny town off of 77 between like New Philadelphia and Canton. It's 15 minutes from the Pro Football Hall of Fame, but it's a very rural. I always think of that area as kind of like the gateway to that part of Ohio that is like, it looks like, yeah, kind of like that. It's like as soon as you leave Canton and head south, that the terrain changes dramatically down there, and it really kicks off right around Bolivar, which is also like, I guess the way in Bigfoot terms, the way you would put it is that is the northern sort of tip of Don Keating's Sasquatch Triangle, because that would be Strasburg is kind of where he draws the line on the triangle, but Bolivar's right there.
Okay. All right. So how long have you been doing this? And, did you always want to make movies and shows, or, what do you got going on right now?
I've been making, so Small Town Monsters has been around since 2014. That's when I filed the LLC and started making Minerva Monster. It was supposed to be like a little free YouTube movie. Right. We were going to post it. We assumed it would be a 20-minute movie. And it ended up being close to an hour. And we were able to I was writing for newspapers at the time. For the Canton Repository, I was doing movie reviews. Massillon Independent, I was a freelance reporter. And so I used the contacts I had in the local media to kind of drum up attention for the movie. And it ended up being a lot bigger locally than we expected. And then that just kind of snowballed into the next movie, which is Beast of Whitehall, and then Boggy Creek Monster. And then Mothman of Point Pleasant is where we really took off on the national stage. And then we just, one year after the next, and here we are today. I was definitely not into Bigfoot growing up. It was not something I was super aware of. I don't think I got heavily involved in it, or at least even mildly involved, until maybe 2006, 2007, before I started like watching documentaries and reading the odd book here and there. And then that
Sure.
kind of snowballed over time. And then I got to the point where I was interested enough in it that I wanted to kind of look into it for myself. And at that point, I was starting to write for the newspaper. So I was excited about the idea of taking what I was doing as a reporter and applying it to Bigfootery. And so I had a friend who went to church with me. Actually, the guy who ran the soundboard with me, Don Marchand. He passed away the year that I put out Minerva, but I have his Bigfoot statue in my front yard still today. But Don's the guy that got me into it. And in 2014 or 20, it would have been like 20, maybe 2010, something like that. He told me about this lady he knew. She was a dentist. Her husband was the DA, the district attorney, I think, for in the city of Canton. Stark County, I guess, and they owned a ranch outside of Bolivar, and they claimed Russ, I might have told you this, but they claimed that their entire time living at this property for like 30 years, like raising kids and everything there, that they had been visited by a family of Sasquatch, and that they were so like familiar with each other, the family and these Bigfoots, that the family could follow these things on horseback to a cave. They knew where they lived. They knew how many young there were. I mean, this is like, and this was blowing my mind because this is back when I kind of was buying into it, but I also assumed that everyone that claimed activity must be nuts. Like, I don't know how else to put it, but that was just the way I thought of things. And I met them. I met these people and I talked to them, and they seemed legit. And I still don't know what to think of the story because it's so over the top. But
did they literally tell you, hey, oh, by the way, we have dinner and we go out on a horse and
you can, the husband and wife and their children, they're not
really?
Children. The girl actually runs the dentist practice today. You can ask them today and they will tell you the same story.
Really?
Yeah. And I don't know what to make of any of it still today.
No evidence though.
No evidence. No. And the story is so outlandish. I believe they would feed them. They would put scraps out for them. But the part of the story that always seemed the most just bizarre was that they claimed they could follow them on horse. They would follow them on horseback to where they lived. And so the interesting thing is, so I find this story, I'm flabbergasted by it. I go down to the road on the south side of Bolivar, and this would be the north side, the absolute north side of Strasburg. There's a road called French Hill Road. There's another road called St. Peter's Church Road. And I would drive these roads. And then if I saw people, I would try to stop and talk to them and just to see, like, did you ever have anything happen out here? And one time I was driving around and there was an elderly couple walking down the street, and I pulled over like a crazy person and got out and started talking to them. And they proceeded to tell me that during the 70s, there were all sorts of sightings down there. Just that specific area. The St. Peter's Church Road, French Hill Road. And that there had been numerous reports, not reports, I guess they would have said neighbors talking to them and things like that, of deer and livestock stuffed up in trees, ripped in half, stuffed in trees, things like that. And then I might have even talked to Mark DeWorth and asked him about it. And I found out that was like well known, like that particular part of Bolivar was like well known for Bigfoot activity. The interesting thing about that is that during the 70s, 80s, 90s, even into the early 2000s, that was all that property back there, other than the odd home that was owned by, these people that had lived there for generations. All that property back there was owned by like a coal mine or strip mine. It was strip mining land, but I forget the name of the company that owned it. And they, in the early 2000s, had just started selling off little parcels of it. And so now today, if you go back there, there's actually a good number of houses and things like that back there. And I haven't heard anything about activity down there, since the since the early days. But that was the most roundabout way of telling you how I got into all this. But that's how I got into it.
Gotcha. So were you involved in it when you had your sighting, or did you have your sighting, then you got more involved in it?
No, I was very involved. That was just, my sighting was 2021. So I was, we were filming a series on Heather's property. Heather Mosier, she, again, she's Small Town Monsters researcher. She's a book editor. She's our secret weapon, one of our many secret
wonderful
weapons.
Person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. She has property outside of Minerva, on maybe 400 acres. The street that they live on, down at the end of the street, which I say street, but I mean, it's 2 miles down the road. Her mother-in-law had a sighting back in 2017 during the winter, of a Bigfoot. And obviously Minerva, I made my first movie in Minerva. So there's activity there, that goes back way, way further than people realize. I mean, the activity around Minerva stretches back to the probably late 1800s, but at least to the 1950s is the earliest witness I've interviewed. So there's activity in that area. We had brought in Alexander Pedikov and Eli Watson. They had just finished up doing like a crazy 2-week shoot out in like Colorado and Utah, and they'd been doing all this crazy backcountry hiking and all this other stuff. And I'm like, why don't you guys come to Minerva? You can camp in the woods. There's a hunting cabin there. I can bring at the time he was 3, my son, my 4-year-old son, I guess he was 4-year-old son, and we'll all camp out and just have like a Small Town Monsters camp out, hang out. And there had been activities, some stuff had been happening on the property that Heather was aware of. She was kind of into the gifting thing. I don't think she called it that, but she was putting out stones and stuff in the woods, and things would be taken and then replaced with other things. And a lot of weird stuff like that was going on. So we had brought in Alex and Eli, and Heather was there. Courtney was there. Tommy and I were staying at the cabin. So we're all down there for kind of like a fun weekend camp out, and Alex and Eli were going to shoot an episode of Beyond the Trail while they were there. And there was some weird stuff. The one night they were sleeping in their tent. Alex and Eli were sleeping in their tent up in this chunk of woods, this chunk of forest at the top of the hill, kind of from where the cabin is. The cabin sits down in this tiny little, it's basically like a holler with a spring and a forest, like pine forest on all sides. It's really gorgeous there. But they were sleeping up in their tent and had heard what they said sounded like bipedal footsteps just stomping through the woods in the middle of the night. Woke them both up. The only really weird thing that happened to me was that 2:00 in the morning the one night, everyone had gone off to do their Bigfooting stuff, and Tommy and I were laying down to go to bed. Or had already laid down to go to bed. I got him in bed at like 9:00. Everyone else is going off to have fun, and I'm in bed with my 4-year-old because I just gotta go to bed. And so Tommy and I, we're sound asleep. 2:00 in the morning, a wood knock goes off right outside the cabin. I mean, right, as loud a wood knock as I've ever heard, and we heard a lot out at that property, especially. So this wood knock goes off, and I get up and I go out, and no one's out there. And so I get on the radio and I say, where are you guys at? Alex at that point was in a tree stand surrounded by coyote. So he was not anywhere near us. And the rest of them were further up toward the other patch of woods, the same woods that they had been sleeping in. And so I realized it probably was something other than, one of them. So that was the weird thing that kind of happened. And then we had decided to make this series about Bigfoot out there. And it was going to be kind of, we would bring in a guest each episode, interview them on the property, and then them and I would go out and do some Bigfooting on the property. And the idea was that nothing would happen. So let's frame it as more of a podcast, and we'll do it that way. Well, like the first night out there, it was, I've been Bigfooting in Area X. In Oklahoma, I've been out with the Olympic Project. I've gone to a lot of the hot spots in the country. I'm not on the level of like Alex, but I've been to a lot of the spots, and the activity that we had that night was the most activity I've ever experienced anywhere. We had numerous wood knocks. We had whoops. We had rocks thrown right at us, like by our heads. All sorts of stuff happened. And then the next day we were out hanging trail cams on the property, and that's when I had my sighting. We were in like a gator crossing a pipeline, and I looked up the pipeline, and this dark brown individual was crossing the pipeline, the clear cut of the pipeline into the forest, and I saw it for maybe less than a second. Okay. And just fur, covered in fur. I say fur because it wasn't hair. I've heard the hair reports, people say long stringy hair. What I saw was like thick fur, like you would see on a dog. But this thing was running at a ridiculous pace, and you could see its arm pumping. And the only thing that my brain locked on to the muscle in the arm, like there was muscle ripple in the arm when it was moving. And for some reason, that's like what my brain locked onto.
So how far away from it?
100 yards, maybe.
Okay.
75, 100 yards. And it was up a hill, and between us was, I said clear cut, but in Ohio, it was clear cut, but all that brush comes up. So you had probably 6 foot tall thorns all the way up the hill. And that was what was so weird about it, because I could not figure out what it looked like to me was that this thing was running on top of the brush, which was not possible,
Sure.
So what ended up happening is they brush hogged that hill a week later, and we go up there and find that there's a path, just a dirt road that runs from the neighboring farm over to the next farm. And so whatever this thing was running on that dirt path, dirt road. And so whatever this thing was just crossing the clearest path it had. And from my point of view, I couldn't see that road, but the brush had stopped just below the road. So to my eyes, it looked like it was running on top of the brush, but it was running on this path. So I have no other details on the thing other than it was like a dark brown, and the fur was just thick fur. It didn't look long or anything.
Was it going the same direction you were?
No. Well, no, it was not at all. We were going this way, and it was going that way. And when I saw it, and we're on a hill, so we're on a hill, and when I saw it, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I screamed stop, but as I screamed stop, I had already jumped out of the gator, which was doing about 20. So, and we're on a decline. And so when I hit the ground, I'm doing that like,
are you your own stunt man?
Yeah, basically. And so thankfully at that time I was like fairly in shape. So when I hit the ground, I was able to keep on my feet, but it could have been bad otherwise. But maybe 3 weeks later is when we found that track out there. And then unfortunately, over the course of the next 5-6 months, the activity out there really declined. But what was happening was the neighboring property, which is where I think these things were actually kind of hunkered down. The neighboring property is huge. It's got far more water flowing through it. There's more water. There were probably more deer over there. That all started getting clear cut to make way for like a dirt bike track that ran through this property.
Oh boy.
And over the course of the next year, they essentially clear cut that whole property. And then they started redigging the pipeline on Heather's property. And so the activity dried up. We had Cliff out there in April of 2022, right before we went to Alaska. And him and I experienced something, but it wasn't on that property. We went out to a nearby lake and had a call that we caught when we got to the lake, but we didn't experience anything on the property. And that was kind of like the story of being out there over the first month and a half, the first like 6-8 weeks. There was plenty of activity. It did decline over that 6 to 8 weeks, but after that, by the time the winter really got going and the leaf canopy had fallen, the activity just declined. And then today, I mean, Heather says that there's like nothing going on out there. Like she'll It's like we hit the perfect window to have, you know, the experiences we did out there, but I don't think they'll be back because of the amount of development that's going on, not just on that property and the neighboring property, but even within a 2-mile radius. There's a lot of development, a lot of houses going in and things like that out there. That's kind of the story of Ohio, at least this part of Ohio. I'm starting to think is like the activity. You hear about these stories from the 70s and 80s of all this activity in these locations, and then you go to the location, you just find developments everywhere, and there hasn't been a sighting since 87 or something, and that's what I keep running into.
Gotcha. So you've been all over the world, you know, doing your show. Like I said, the famous one, you know, there's that famous one with several episodes up in Alaska. Have you ever been out and, you know, had things happen while you were filming these things? I know you've been in the woods with Russ on an occasion. So
specifically Bigfoot related, or
I don't know anything. I don't care. You know, mountain lion attack you. That'd be a cool story. But
well, I have a mountain lion story with Shane Corson. It's pretty hilarious. Where we were in the OP. It was right before he got me horrifically ill with like the worst bout of altitude sickness I've ever had. I blame Shane entirely for it because he marched me up this mountain and back down the mountain in like an hour and a half, and then I spent the next 3 days vomiting and sick out of my mind. But the same day, the same experience, we were on our way up that hike, or it might have been back down from the hike, and I heard what I thought was a baby crying in the woods. And I said, do you hear what sounds like a baby? And Shane stops immediately and gets his gun out. And I'm like, well, this must be serious. And so he crouches down, he looks into the brush, and he goes, there's a mountain lion. And I said, what do we do? And he goes, well, you just got to run at it and hope it works out. He grabs his gun, just goes running into the brush at this thing. And I mean, it's myself and Mark Mansky, you know, who are like, we're from Ohio. Like, like we're just standing there looking at each other like, what do we do? And thankfully, whatever, you know, running at it, I guess, worked, and it left us alone. But no, you know, Bigfoot related, I guess the craziest thing that happened on a shoot is that in 2018, we were blessed, I guess, to go into Area X with the NAWAC.
Right.
And we were the first people, we might still be the only people, I'm not sure, to actually go into X itself. Not, you know, I know the Rob Lowe show filmed near there, but they weren't actually in X.
Right.
So Alton Higgins actually took us into X, and we got to be in there with Kathy Strain and Bob Strain, who were like two of my favorite people on earth. Mm-hmm. We were in there with Daryl Collier, who's one of my absolute heroes.
Yeah. We had Daryl come on. We have Kathy coming on.
Awesome. Yeah, they're the sweetest people. Daryl's deceptively sweet because you see this dude and you would think he's like like he's gonna murder you in your sleep or something. Like he's this hardcore, like, you know, military guy, but sweetest guy I've met, honestly. But we're in there with them and Brian Brown, and we had numerous things happen, but probably the craziest was we only got to be there for 3 days. We had a very finite, I mean, this was like the earliest days of Small Town Monsters. Budgets were like non-existent. I think we filmed that whole thing for like $400. So we had no time to do anything. So we're in there for 3 days, and the entire time, and we were there in like July or August. So it was brutal because you're down in this valley. There's no airflow. There's like no breeze. And you're basically in like an inland rainforest. And I get migraines. So the entire time we're in there, I have a migraine headache. So for 3 days, I have a migraine that no matter what I did, I could not get rid of it. I have prescription pills. They were not getting rid of it. So I have this migraine for 3 days. The final night, we're done. We've experienced a lot of stuff. I have some really cool footage of eye shine that I shot in there that I'm convinced was a Bigfoot. So we had done that already, and we go to bed, and it's late at night. I barely slept all the entire time because of this headache. And it was about maybe 2 or 3 in the morning, and I had just fallen asleep. And as soon as I fall asleep, a rock slammed into the metal roof of what they call the hooch, which is basically just like the shed that they had built in the woods. So the rock slams into the roof of the hooch. It was so loud, it sounded like a gunshot going off. I sit straight up in bed. I'm in a tent in my cot. I'm in a tent with Adam Dugan. He sits up. And then as soon as that happened, there was a whoop that sounded like an Apache war whoop from a John Wayne movie. Like that's the way I say it. Like it sounded fake. Like it sounded like it was designed, and it was like whoop. But then there's a pause, and it broke into what we now came to find was basically like gibbon laughter. So it sounds exactly like a gibbon in a zoo laughing, but at like an obscenely loud volume. It echoed across the valley when it went off. And I jump out of that tent. Adam jumps out of the tent, and when we were out of the tent, Brian was already running toward us from his tent. Daryl busts out. This is the funniest mental image I still crack up when I think about this, but Daryl busts out the door of the cabin they built in nothing but underwear. His boxers, holding like some huge assault rifle. Like some gun. Like he's got this massive gun in his hand. Yeah. He busts out the door in that. Bob never came out of the tent, but Bob came out of the tent, but Kathy was in there. And I just hear Kathy go, I didn't hear anything.
Wow. One of those sleepers.
Yeah. So that was probably the craziest, because that happened at a time where I was very much convinced. I had shifted from like a point of, I think these things are real, to a point of, I don't think these things are real.
Really?
And so because you got to think 2018, I'd already filmed probably 7-8 movies across the country, and I've been numerous places. I'd never seen anything. I'd never experienced anything. And so I was starting to think there's nothing to it. And then that moved the needle on me, or for me, to maybe 70-80%. Like these things are out there, because there's no explanation for what could have done that. I know when this came out, there were people that were like, well, it's probably people. Well, I mean,
we've heard him describe Area X.
Yeah.
There's no people around.
Uh-huh. Yeah, so it's that was probably the craziest thing that's happened to me that was Bigfoot related. About a year ago, we saw a bunch of my crew, including Zach, who I know Russ met. Zach is the most skeptical person I know. I grew up with Zach. He doesn't. Just being totally honest, he doesn't buy any of this. He's into filmmaking and making our movies great. He does not buy any of the stuff. And he, with his own eyes, saw lights in the woods, like orbs, mystery lights. So that was in no way necessarily connected to Bigfoot, but that's probably the weirdest thing we had happen as a crew. Was numerous members of our crew and a lot of Eric Altman's group in PA all had this visual of
we had somebody on not too long ago, and they basically said they were walking down a path and they saw this orb, this light in front of them, and yet there was a Bigfoot behind them making noise, and it was like, hey, there's something over here, don't look at me behind here. Remember that was about 3 or 4 episodes ago, Russ? I can't remember who that was.
Yeah. I just think that the people are like, when they see the orbs, they're out in the woods doing Bigfoot stuff. So then they naturally associate the two, and they may not be associated at all.
That's my stance on that. I think weird stuff in general happens in the woods.
Yeah.
So connecting it with Bigfoot is kind of the go-to now, but I don't connect the two myself. But that was how those are the two probably weirdest things that have happened on an STM shoot.
I can remember being in a similar place as you. This would have been probably 15 years ago now. The first 2 years that I was in the BFRO, I was taking all these hot reports, doing, I don't know how many, a lot of expeditions a year. and I didn't have anything happen for 2 years that I couldn't explain. You know, just I was in the best places with the best people, and just nothing was happening. You know, but you went to all these places. You went to X. You went to the Olympic Project, which is up in the Pacific Northwest. You've been all over. Is there any place that when you got to it, you're like, this is the best looking place I've ever seen? This looks like if there's a Bigfoot's going to exist, this is the place. You had that impending sense that you were just in the right place at any of these places?
I think most of them, like, especially, you know, Area X is like, as soon as you see it, there was a guy that used to be an X. I can't even remember his name, which I feel bad about, but he was in like the British paramilitary. He was like British. He would like parachute into battle, and he'd served in Africa. I know I told you the story, Russ, but
yes,
he told me that X was more remote and more difficult to get into than locations he had been to in Africa. Like, it's when you go in there, it's actually really intimidating and scary. It wouldn't be for you guys, I'm sure, but for me, it took a 2-hour drive on this dirt road down into the middle of nowhere. And the entire time you're thinking, like, if something happens in here, like an emergency situation, you're not getting out of here. And then you get in there, and the first thing they do is sit you down and go over their plans for, like, if something happens while you're in there, and they actually kill a Bigfoot. That was like what our experience was in there. It was like, if say they shoot something, well, this is what happens. This is where the body goes. This is where this goes. And then this is how the cars convoy out. And this is what you have to do to get out of here quickly. And so that whole experience was wild. But the Olympic Project is like the same thing. You go out there. I'll tell you, like, people underestimate the Adirondacks. Like, that's one of my favorite places on earth. And I made 2 movies there so far, but I mean, I want to do so much more just because my parents went there on their honeymoon. Like, it's something I connect with my family.
That's cool.
And so the Adirondacks, people don't realize how backcountry that is, or how massive. 6 million acres. It's like, you know, it's a massive chunk of untamed land. Mm-hmm. And so those 3 places always spring to mind. But I mean, Minerva, you know, what are the odds you're going to find something there? Well, then something happens. Or you go to Alaska. It's like, for me, Alaska and Minerva are almost opposite ends of the spectrum, because you go to Alaska and it's so big and so untamed.
Yeah.
I believe that they're there. I really do. I think they're 100% there. You're never going to find a Bigfoot in Alaska. It's like they might walk in front of you, or something, if you're lucky. And I've talked, you know, like, I had a crazy experience in Switzerland, of all places. I went with my dad and my sister to Switzerland back in September, and we're on Jungfrau to get up to the peak, and we're in this line, and I start talking to these people next to me, and the lady it was this guy and this woman, and the woman told me that her brother, they had been staying with her brother in Alaska, and they live in a tiny town just outside of Homer. And I knew right where they were talking about, because we stayed in Homer for 4 days when we were there. And she was telling me that while they were there, her brother had a Bigfoot cross the road in front of him. And this was like, so I mean, that kind of thing happens in Alaska. Yeah. But what are the odds you're going to go to Alaska looking to find Bigfoot and actually find it? It's just not going to happen, just given the size and scope of it. And then on the other end of the spectrum is Minerva, which is like, yeah, it's rural, but there's these pockets of forest in Minerva, you know, or very patchy forest. Most of it's farmland and then patchy forest. And yet that's like where the stuff happened for me.
It's like fishing in a pond, man. You know what I mean? Yep. Like, there's something to be said for me spending a lot of my time in Southeast Ohio versus West Virginia, because West Virginia, they just move back a little bit further in the woods than I can get, or over the next mountain, or whatever it happens to be. But in Ohio, there's only so many places for them to be. That's why it seems like in places like Salt Fork, they've become a little tolerant of people. You know, they may interact a little more. I mean, where are they going to go to? You know, I mean, there's not that much room for them to get away.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we've talked to Doug about that. You know, that these things may be closer than we think they are. You know, they're scavengers. They get used to being around dumpsters and corn cribs and farms with, you know, barrels of, you know, sweet feed in them. And it's easy. You know what I mean? It's sort of like the city mouse and the country mouse. You know, that city mouse gets used to going to the grocery store and just buying food rather than going out and actually having to look for it. So,
yeah. Well,
anyway,
okay, I got ask this question, so I was curious about it. Of course, I had a bunch of questions I'm not going to be able to get to, but so let's say that you had a unlimited budget and you're going to put together your dream movie. What is that going to look like?
Is it a documentary or a narrative?
Do whatever you want.
Yeah, whatever you want.
So documentary, it's Ape Canyon.
Oh, okay.
I do something on Ape Canyon, and I do it with Mark Marcel.
Yeah.
If it was a narrative, my son is begging me to make a narrative about the Flatwoods Monster. He's upset. I made a documentary about the Flatwoods Monster, and he watches it all the time.
Yeah.
So it would be some sort of narrative film about the Flatwoods Monster. But the Ape Canyon story is like one that I've been since the earliest days of even doing like my podcast before I started working on Small Town Monsters. That story has always really appealed to me. And there's weird aspects to that story that haven't been covered too much that Mark has told me about. Mark Marcel has told me about. But I'm also I love the historic cases. Like we got to cover Ruby Creek in On the Trail of Bigfoot, the Origin. And that's like a classic. Like I love covering. My parents owned a historical bookstore growing up, and I traveled, and my parents were obsessed with history. And so I think that's where that love for that kind of stuff comes from. I'm also really scared of seeing some of those classic stories lost over time.
Yeah.
Like the Ostman story and Ruby Creek and all this, a lot of those. And so Ape Canyon's the one that like bucket list kind of thing. And this isn't an announcement, but it kind of is, but we are making an Ape Canyon movie. It'll happen.
Nice.
It'll be next year. So, but that's the one that I've wanted to do. And you could go back, like if you listen to any interview going all the way back, that in terms of especially Bigfoot stories, that's always been top of the pile for me. It's like the one I wanted to do.
I want to say that I don't remember if it was Mark or maybe Cliff had told me, or someone told me that Mark had a book coming out soon. So there were some things that happened or associated with it that people aren't public yet. I guess everybody's kind of holding back, waiting for Mark's book to come out or without. But I mean, I remember Cliff telling me it's a health hazard to get to that spot, that it's legitimately not very safe.
Yeah.
To get over that hill.
Yeah, we're working through. We'll be filming out there in July. So I'm working through figuring out how we're doing all that.
Yeah, I can remember them saying that, they used to be able to find the wood from the cabin, but now after the last snowfalls and some other things and flooding in that area, I guess that it's pretty much gone. That you know where it is, but you can't see it any longer.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, does that ever make you go back? I mean, in 9 years, you've went from it was this no budget, you and a couple of your friend thing, to now. I mean, it's gotten large. I mean, your biggest movie has how many views? Which one is it, and how many views does it have?
Well, weirdly enough, I think the thing that's been viewed the most is On the Trail of UFOs, which a lot of people don't even know exists, but it was viewed across the 8 episodes. It was viewed 50 million times.
That's crazy.
So that's definitely like the most viewed thing that STM has done. The movies, I'm not sure. I would think it's On the Trail of Bigfoot, The Discovery, the one about the Olympic project. I think that's the biggest movie we've made. I know. I mean, it's wild. We made The Mothman of Point Pleasant in 2017. In 2018, I was doing a library presentation and had a phone call from Adam Wingard, who was at the time, he had just signed on to direct Godzilla versus Kong. And he calls me and he's like, I got your number. I hope it's okay. He's like, I'm a huge fan of Invasion on Chestnut Ridge, which was like a bomb. Like no one had seen this movie. And I was like, okay. And he's like, so we talked and we became buddies. And he messaged me a week ago and was telling me he was in the editing bay on he's making Godzilla versus Kong 2. And he's like, our color, he said, you're going to get a kick out of this. Our color girl, the girl doing the color grading on the movie, noticed that there was a Mothman pin that he had snuck into the movie as an Easter egg. And she said, oh, I love Mothman. And he said, you know, one of my good friends is a filmmaker who makes movies about cryptids. And she goes, is it Seth Breedlove?
Wow.
And I go, I mean, that's a wild thing, because he had also told me, so when they used to have a Godzilla directors, like they have all the guys that made the Godzilla movies. So Gareth Evans, Adam, Mike Doherty, one of the others. The guy that made Skull Island. They would do dinner once Jackson. A month. No, it's not. It's not that one. It's the Skull Island. It's okay. Voight Roberts is his last name, but I can't remember his first name. But anyway, they would get together and they would have dinner, and apparently on numerous occasions the dinner ended with them watching one of our movies. And so it is weird, because you think that equates to some sort of like wild success as a company, but the truth is, like, our budgets haven't changed. We still make movies on the average budget for an SDM movie is $10,000. And I tell and most of the time it's considerably lower than that. So we still live as a company. We're very frugal. We aren't tied to any major corporation, so we don't have millions of dollars to play with. We do everything independently, but there is an awareness of us that I don't know that has.
I mean, obviously, in order to continue to do it, you make money doing this, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's how we run as a company. But
okay,
that's
Russ and I might kick in a couple bucks, and maybe you can do a movie.
Yeah, I mean, but we run, but it's all independent, so it's all extremely low budget still today. But I never saw it getting to where it is today. I don't think when I quit my medical billing job in 2015 to focus on this full time that I thought it would get to where it is today. I quit my medical billing job because I was like, I was in the middle of making Beast of Whitehall, and I knew I was about to go on an 8-day or 10-day shoot, whatever it was, to Arkansas with Lyle Blackburn to make Boggy Creek Monster. And I was like, to do that, I can't have a full-time job. And so I did that. And then we, as a company, we made I tell the crew this today, like, as a company, we didn't make money all the way through probably like 2020. There was no, like, we were surviving just on what we made as a company. That's how we just put every dime back into the company. And wow. So to grow it to where it is today is crazy. But I mean, today it's no easier. We're in the middle of a lawsuit with our distributor because they haven't paid us since June. And so it's no easier, but we've managed to grow, which is the big thing. And just piggybacking off of something Russ said, the crew that is involved are largely, they're all friends, obviously, but they're all people I either I've known since I was a kid, or they're people who I was friendly with or became friends with before we hired them. They're all people who I genuinely love and love to work with. And that's why we work together so well as a crew. So Alex had been doing movies with SCM all the way back to 2018 when he made On the Trail of Champ. And Eli started working with us because he just randomly showed up on a shoot in Washington, that Olympic project shoot. And it's everyone involved is somehow, we're a very close-knit group, but a lot of these people are people who I've known for quite a while.
So where do you go long term? I mean, do you miss more of the small days? Or are you excited about the direction you're going? You know, what do you have? Where do you see yourself a couple years from now?
Do I? Yeah, I definitely miss the old days, but just because the thing that I've noticed is my creativity was more was probably flourishing more in the early days of STM because of the fact that that's just me being brutally honest. Because of the fact that I wasn't I didn't have to, I wasn't pulled in a billion different directions. I was kind of able to focus on one project, and it was just me and my ex-wife kind of running the show. And today there's 9 people that work here, and we're we're doing like in 3 weeks we're going to be filming a huge series about UFOs, and then right after that we have to film 2 other movies to finish out the year, and then we got to get other shows running. So there's always that kind of thing. But the good thing about like growing is that over time, once enough people are in here, I can focus more, put more of my focus back on the creativity. I hope that I don't think that shows through in the work. But I have noticed I had to shift the focus of the types of films I was making from the more like a lot of our movies were very like narrative driven. So Bray Road Beast and Mothman and Point Pleasant and Mothman Legacy and all these, they're very much focused on like recreations and like really creative recreations and special effects and things like that. And that takes a lot of time, energy, and money. And so for the last 2 years, there's been less of a focus on that and more of a focus on like topics that we can kind of tackle without, I guess it's the genre of documentary. It's more of like a verite style as opposed to the more like narrative driven style of some of the early stuff. But I think next year that's already starting to change. That'll change this year. We brought our effects guy is back on board for Lost Contact, and so I think that'll change even before the end of this year. But that was a really good question, by the way. No one's ever asked me that. I really miss the earliest days, but where we're at right now is infinitely more exciting than anything we've ever done before, because we're launching I mentioned it to you guys privately beforehand, but we're about to launch like our own, basically like a television channel. And so once that happens, we'll have positioned ourselves as a distributor, and then kind of the sky's the limit as far as like what we can cover, and the people that are involved are so talented. So
will that be on like a Roku channel or something like that?
It's going to be across the board. The Roku is one, but there's numerous other platforms we're working on getting on, including like Spectrum and DirecTV. So this isn't solely going to be relegated to like a streaming channel.
Sure. Gotcha. Okay. Seth, can you believe an hour went by already?
I can't. Anytime I'm with Russ, this is what happens. His interviews, I interviewed him for probably 4.5 hours combined over the course of shooting Mountain State Monsters last year. So
you fell asleep. That's why it went so quickly.
So
I always tell people
that you got something.
Go ahead, Brad.
I was going to say, I know you got something coming out with Russ here before too long. What's that?
Yeah, we're going to film. We'll be filming On the Trail of Bigfoot, the Ancients, this spring, and that's going to be sort of the companion piece to On the Trail of Bigfoot, the Origin. The Origin was it's not out yet. I have no idea when it's going to be out because of our distributor, but it should be out sometime in the spring, and then we'll be filming the next movie right around the same time. It's going to be focused around the Smoky Mountains, and we'll be utilizing Russ's expertise on the Appalachian Bigfoot.
I'll be excited to get out there and spend some time with you. I know every time I do, I mean, I have done a lot of interviews and hundreds of podcasts, and I'll tell you, every time I'm with Seth and his crew, they just make you feel so comfortable, and it just is easy. And a lot of times it's just not like that at all. So I mean,
Awesome.
truly professionals. But I
Cool.
can't wait to see you here in a couple of months. Well, I'm sure I'll see you before then, but looking forward to that.
Yeah, I'm excited.
And how can people watch what you got, see what you got, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so each week we're uploading new stuff to YouTube. So YouTube's kind of a home for the episodic content. Although the episodic content is not migrating, but expanding over to Tubi as well. So the series that Russ was in, Mountain State Monsters, that will also be seen on Tubi as well here pretty soon. So
what's your YouTube channel?
It's just Small Town Monsters.
Okay.
So Small Town Monsters for the YouTube stuff. For the feature films, those are available on most major streaming platforms, so Amazon and Tubi and all the big Pluto, Vudu, all that stuff. I
think
beyond that, we do book publishing at Small Town Monsters, which we started last year. We've got new books coming out, but we do have a few out right now. There's one by Bruce Hallenbeck about the Kinderhook creature, and then we published a book last year about the Dogman Triangle by Aaron Deese, and then there's a children's book we did by Michael Strayer about the Vegetable Man of West Virginia. So that was a children's book, and then our Kickstarter launches on February 1st, I think. So if you're into our stuff and you want to own it on like DVD and Blu-ray, that's a great way to get our stuff on DVD and Blu-ray without shelling out extra money on our website. It's basically like a big pre-order campaign.
Okay. All right. And
hey, we appreciate you. Thanks for taking time, man. I know you have a sick one there at the house, and Brad and I know how busy you are, so we're really thankful.
It's okay. Thanks for having me, guys.
All right.
Hey, it's good to see you.
Yeah,
thanks,
you too.
Nice actually meeting you. I've heard a lot about you. So
you too. Appreciate you guys.
Thanks. All right, Russ. That went by pretty quick.
Yeah, he's such an interesting guy, and let me tell you, in person, it makes you. It's just fun to be around them and our crew.
So why don't we figure up a topic to do a movie on, and we'll just have them make us a movie.
Well, I mean, we have some stuff going on. We're going to do our own thing, right?
We'll kick in some cash and make our own movie, right?
Yeah, that's right, man. I mean, Bigfoot going wild.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Wide Open Research on Insta, the Bigfoot Doc.
Please subscribe.
Yep. Your West Virginia Bigfoot page. How many's up there?
I see 4,400 on Twitter and 3,300 or 3,400 on the West Virginia Bigfoot Facebook page.
We're
so those numbers are creeping. Instagram, we're at around 1,000.
Yeah, we're getting there. I appreciate all the help, and I saw that we got a memo last week that's saying there's a lot of having record numbers on the podcast, and everybody's listening, so we appreciate all that.
Yeah.
And if you got any ideas, comments, questions, you can email them to me. Or Russ and I don't know if I'm going to respond, or if it's something stupid,
I will.
Yeah,
reach out. I'm available.
I will not respond, or I will respond in a sarcastic and demeaning manner. So anyway.
All right. Well, thanks everybody.
All right.
Go ahead. You got something to say?
I was going to say, and people think I'm cranky. So anyway.
Well, you're trying to smile more. You've been working on it the last 6 months, right?
I've been working on that. So all right.
All right.
All right.
Thanks everyone.
All right. Bye.